computer programming, we deal with these things called nested lists and nested loops. These are a little more complicated than singly layered lists and loops because there are multiple layers and variables to keep track of. So let's actually look at an example of these nested loops. If you look right here, we have an example of a nested loop. It's a nested loop because here we have this outer loop for I in range 8, and then here this inner loop is nested inside this outer loop. So what actually happens in this code is that everything in here, everything in this for I in range 8, will run 8 times, just like loops that you're used to. And then the tricky part is that everything in this inner loop right here for j in range 6 will run 6 times for each iteration of the outer loop. So in total, this line right here will run 6 times 8, 48 times. We can look at this table as an example of what actually happens in this code right here. Every time this line runs, j will increment by 1. And once j has run 6 times, I will increment by 1. So we end up with this kind of times table that we add to sum with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I increments again, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, with j incrementing every time the code runs, and I incrementing every 6 times the line runs. We can use nested loops to solve real-life problems. In this example, we'll go over sorting, which is a problem that we solve using a nested loop. Let's say I wanted to sort this list from shortest to tallest. What would I do? So first thing, I want to check this one element list right here, see that, oh, it's sorted because there's only one element. Next, I'll move on to this 2 element list, and I notice that it's not sorted since this is shorter than this. So I do a swap. Next, I'll repeat the same thing but with a 3 element list. This is sorted, but this is not. So I'll swap this, and I'll find that the list again is sorted because this is bigger than this is bigger than this. Finally, I'll check the entire list, and I'll see that it's not sorted since this is smaller than this. So I swap again, swap again, swap again. And so now our entire list is sorted. This is a problem that we solved using a nested loop. So let's actually look at the nested loop in code and see what it looks like. So let's take a look at this actual code and how we accomplish sorting using a nested list. Here, we have a while loop nested inside a for loop. I'm not going to run through every line of the code, but what's important to know is that this for loop will loop through 1 to the length of the list and ensure that the first I elements in the list are sorted. So if I equals 1, it'll ensure that the first 1 elements are sorted. If I equals 2, it'll ensure that the first 2 elements of the list are sorted, and so on and so forth. And what this while loop does is that this while loop will actually do the sorting. So if I equals 2, then this while loop will actually sort the first 2 elements to ensure that they're sorted. If I equals 3, this while loop will sort the first 3 elements, and so on. Finally, let's look at a nested list. So this is a nested list. We have one big overall nested list, and each item in this list are called sublists. And in the sublist, we have some integers. Let's say we were trying to find the maximum item in the nested list. We couldn't just loop through each item in the list because each item is actually just a sublist and it's not actually an integer. It doesn't have any numeric value. We also couldn't just loop through one of these sublists. So for example, if we loop through just the first sublist and we found the maximum, we have no way of telling if that's bigger or smaller than any of the items in the next 2 sublists. So what do we want to do? We want to actually use a nested loop right here. So what this nested loop will do is it will loop through each sublist in our nested list. And for each sublist, it'll loop through each element and compare it to our current maximum, which we initialize to 0. And if it's bigger than our current maximum, then it will set our current maximum to that number. And so when we reach 6, it'll set to 6, and then it will get through this sublist, and then finally it will get to this sublist, and it will see 7, and set it to 7, and then it will search the last sublist, and see that there's nothing bigger than 7, and so we know for sure that we found our maximum of our nested list.